Today, we're going deep into something called Autocracy Inc.
Autocracy Inc.
Yeah, sounds a little bit like a villainous corporation from a comic book, right?
It does.
But it's actually way more complicated and honestly a lot more unnerving. Think about it like this, like a network of all these modern autocratic regimes.
Okay.
Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
They're all kind of working together like in this shadowy alliance,
Yeah.
strategically collaborating to hold on to power.
I see.
And what really makes this different from like the old school dictatorships, like what we saw back in the day, is that these regimes, they're way more pragmatic.
Yeah, that's what's interesting. They're not really bound by any single ideology,
Right, exactly.
Like the old fascism or communism. It's way more about just practical stuff.
Yeah.
Self-preservation.
Yeah.
Getting as much wealth as possible and holding on to control. And to really understand it, we've got all these articles, research papers, even some first-hand accounts.
Whoa, first-hand accounts. Okay, this is getting real.
Yeah, so let's just dive in and try to figure out how this network works, how they do what they do, the threats they pose, and what, if anything, democracies can even do to push back.
I mean, we've all seen those pictures, right? The opulent palaces, the lavish yachts, the extravagant lifestyles of these leaders.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like a caricature of excess. Is that just personal indulgence?
Oh, no, it's much more calculated than that. It's sending a very specific message to their citizens and to the world, basically saying, like, look how successful we are.
Oh, wow.
We are the ones in control. And it's a huge contrast to those old school dictators like Hitler, Mussolini. They actually tried to kind of downplay their personal wealth.
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay.
But Autocracy Inc., they use this display of wealth as a tool, really, to project strength, project success.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to squash any dissent and kind of create this aura of invincibility,
Wow. That's really smart, but also really, really scary.
Yeah.
So they're basically using wealth as a propaganda tool to reinforce their authority and legitimacy. But it's not just about appearances, is it? I mean, we saw with Putin's invasion of Ukraine, this network has a much, much darker side.
Yeah.
I mean, annexation of territory, those horrifying reports of torture chambers, the forced deportation of Ukrainian children. It's chilling.
Yeah.
It's a complete disregard for international norms.
And Putin's actions in Ukraine, that's a perfect example of how Autocracy Inc. operates. It's not just about brute force. It's a very deliberate strategy to dismantle the whole rules-based international order and replace it with a system where might makes right.
Right.
And that disregard for international law, it's their way of saying we have the power and also chipping away at those norms that democracies rely on.
It's really unsettling, especially for those who are directly affected by those actions.
Mm-hmm.
But what about those regimes that are facing like widespread condemnation, protests from within, even sanctions from the international community?
Mm-hmm.
How do they hold on to power? I'm thinking about Lukashenko in Belarus, Maduro in Venezuela.
Yeah.
How are they still there?
That's where the network kicks in.
Okay.
Autocracy Inc. They provide crucial support for their members.
Okay.
So look at Belarus. Huge protests after that rigged election in 2020, right?
Right.
But Lukashenko, he's still there because of Russia, China, Iran.
Wow.
They gave him economic aid. They covered for him diplomatically, even stepped in directly. Remember when all those Belarusian journalists refused to back up the fake election results?
Yeah.
Russia sent their own journalists in to take over the narrative.
That is outrageous. And then in completely twisted turn, Belarus let Russia use their land to stage the invasion of Ukraine. It's like this messed up cycle of favors and dependence.
Exactly. And it's not just Belarus. Venezuela's Maduro, he's also weathered some serious pressure thanks to Russia, China, Cuba, even Turkey. And it goes way beyond just words,
Yeah.
Financial help, military aid, sharing intel.
Wow.
Autocracy Inc. is like a mutual protection racket. They keep their members safe from being held accountable.
Right.
Keeps them in power.
This reminds me of like the whole debate around Ostpolitik during the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
That idea that if you trade more with the Soviet Union, they'll eventually become more liberal. The U.S. was really skeptical back then, worried about the Soviets getting too much economic leverage. Are we seeing a similar thing now with how much we're engaging economically with China and Russia?
Yeah, it's a parallel worth thinking about. I mean, there are some legitimate concerns, right, about whether all this economic interdependence with places like China and Russia might actually be making them stronger instead of encouraging them to change. Think about the Nord Stream pipeline.
Yeah.
It gave Russia so much control over Europe's energy supply, and they totally weaponized it. So it makes you wonder, are we making the same mistakes again?
Right.
Becoming too reliant on these regimes for essential things like energy and tech?
It's a question we have to grapple with for sure, especially as we get more and more entangled.
Yeah.
And speaking of technology, remember all that optimism when the internet first hit China?
Yeah.
Everyone was so sure it would lead to more freedom and democracy.
Right.
But that just hasn't happened. It's almost like they're using technology to suppress dissent even more.
Yeah.
Why hasn't the internet been the liberating force everyone expected?
Well, China's been much more strategic and adaptable than a lot of people thought they would be. In the beginning, their focus was on just controlling information,
Right.
censorship, that great firewall to block anything sensitive, and they were pushing their own positive narrative about their system.
So it was about playing defense.
Yeah, basically controlling the flow within their borders.
Yeah.
But they've really upped their game since then.
I've been reading about their sharp power strategy, using their economic and cultural clout to try and shape how the world sees them. It's like this charm offensive with a really sinister undercurrent.
Yeah, that's part of it. But they've also moved into this really chilling territory, actively using technology for repression on a scale that's pretty frightening. We're talking about a massive surveillance state, facial recognition everywhere, phone tracking, even DNA collection. It's all being used to keep people in check. They've got this thing called safe city technology. It uses algorithms to go through huge amounts of data, like what people do on social media, what they buy online, even their travel patterns, all to try and predict and stop dissent before it even happens.
That sounds like something out of a dystopian novel. What kind of data are we talking about? And how can these algorithms predict dissent? Imagine being punished for something you haven't even done because some algorithm flagged you as a potential threat.
Well, that's the reality in China.
Oh.
Their safe city system isn't just about watching people. It's about finding and neutralizing anyone they see as a threat before they even do anything. These algorithms, they're fed a constant stream of data, and they look for patterns that are different from what the government considers normal. So anything from speaking out against the government online to hanging out with certain groups can set off alarm bells in the system.
It's a terrifying example of how autocracy can use technology not just to control information, but to actually control people.
Right.
And what's even more worrying is that they're selling these technologies to other countries,
Right.
including democracies. It's like they're trying to normalize surveillance all over the world, which could erode our privacy and freedoms globally.
That's the really insidious part of Autocracy Inc.'s plan, right? It's not just about keeping things locked down inside their own borders. It's about changing the world to fit their interests.
Right.
They're exporting their brand of authoritarianism, and tech is a big part of how they're doing it. And that should worry all of us.
It is scary, this idea that they're exporting this model of authoritarianism and using technology to control people, not just information. And we can't forget about global finance in all of this. All this research we've been looking at, it keeps highlighting kleptocracy, these corrupt leaders amassing huge amounts of wealth through illegal means. It's not just about them getting rich, is it? It's a key part of how they stay in power.
Oh, absolutely. Kleptocracy, it's like the fuel that runs Autocracy Inc. It lets these regimes do whatever they want. They get rich, their friends get rich, they silence anyone who disagrees with them, and it just solidifies their control. They've gotten so good at manipulating the global financial system. Shell companies, secret accounts, and a lot of times Western institutions are actually complicit in it. It's how they hide and move all that dirty money.
So it's like this whole global shadow economy, this network of dirty money just flowing across borders, letting them play by their own rules. The scale of it is just mind-blowing. One report, I think it was about Venezuela, said that during Hugo Chavez's rule, they made almost $800 billion from oil.
Wow.
But a huge chunk of that, instead of helping the people of Venezuela, it just vanished. Corrupt schemes, siphoning it off, ending up in bank accounts all over the world.
And that's just one example. This pattern, this kleptocracy, it's everywhere in Autocracy Inc. They've gotten so good at playing the global financial system, finding the loopholes, taking advantage of weak regulations, and some financial institutions in the West are even helping them, whether they know it or not. And all that hidden money, it becomes their weapon to stay in power. They use it to reward loyalty, bribe officials, fund their propaganda, even use violence and intimidation to crush dissent.
It's like a global mafia, operating in the shadows, using their money to buy influence, silence critics, and undermine democratic institutions. But it's not just about them getting richer, right? This financial power also fuels their ability to control what people see and hear, to manipulate information, and ultimately to shape how people understand the world.
You got it. It's all connected.
Yeah.
That financial power, it's their ammo in the information war they're waging. They're masters of propaganda and disinformation, using this mix of old and new tactics to control the narrative and weaken their opponents. On one hand, they keep a tight grip on the media within their own countries, censoring anything they don't like, and feeding their citizens a carefully crafted version of reality.
Yeah, that's the classic authoritarian playbook, right? Control the information, control the people. But they've also adapted to the digital age. I mean, look at how they use social media to their advantage.
They've turned the internet into a weapon, using it to shape perceptions, create division, and undermine trust in democratic institutions. They flood the internet with disinformation and propaganda, often disguised as legitimate news or opinions.
Right.
Their aim is to manipulate public opinion, amplify those divisions that already exist in society, and create a sense of chaos and uncertainty. And they're not just pushing specific stories, they're trying to destroy our faith in the idea of objective truth, making it almost impossible to tell what's real and what's fake.
It's exhausting sometimes, this constant stream of conflicting information, the blurring of truth and lies. It's like they're trying to wear us down, make us so cynical and disengaged that we just give up on trying to make sense of it all.
You're exactly right. They know that when people are overwhelmed, disillusioned, and don't trust any information, they're less likely to think critically, hold their leaders accountable, or stand up for democratic values. And their tactics are constantly evolving. They're pouring money into AI, machine learning, and all these cutting-edge technologies to refine their propaganda, target specific groups, and make their messages even more insidious and persuasive.
It's scary to think about a future where AI is used to manipulate and control us, instead of liberating us and reinforcing the power of these autocratic regimes. But it's not just about controlling information, is it? Autocracy Inc. also uses more direct methods to silence dissent and maintain control. We've seen this disturbing increase in surveillance, people being detained for no reason, torture, even transnational repression, going after critics and exiles who speak out against these regimes, even when they're not in those countries anymore.
Absolutely. We've talked about the money, we've talked about the information control, but we can't forget about the real human cost of this whole system. These regimes, they've built these massive, sophisticated security apparatuses with networks of informants, spies, secret police, you name it. People are living in constant fear, knowing that anything they say or do, even liking something on social media, could be used against them.
It's a terrifying reality for those living under these regimes. This constant feeling of being watched, having to censor yourself, knowing that even a whisper of dissent could have serious consequences. But this is becoming a global problem, isn't it? We're seeing more and more reports of transnational repression. These regimes are reaching beyond their borders to silence critics and instill fear, even in democratic countries.
It's a really worrying trend. We've seen journalists disappear, activists harassed and intimidated, even assassinations happening on foreign soil. It's a total disregard for international law and a dangerous escalation that threatens the very foundations of democracy and freedom. They're essentially exporting their model of repression, making it clear that no one is safe, no matter where they are in the world.
It's a bleak picture. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by how big and sophisticated this threat from Autocracy Inc. is. But is there any hope? Can democracies fight back against these tactics and protect themselves from this rising tide of authoritarianism?
It's not hopeless, but it requires a complete change in how we think about this. We need to realize that this is a generational challenge that demands a coordinated and sustained response from democracies all over the world.
So what would that look like? Where do we even begin? Do we need to completely overhaul our systems, our institutions, even our way of thinking?
We don't need to throw everything out and start over, but we do need to take a hard look at our priorities, our strategies, and how we understand the threat. First and foremost, we have to recognize that this isn't just a problem for other countries.
Right.
Autocracy Inc. is a global threat, and it needs a global response. No more complacency. We need to acknowledge just how serious this is.
So no more wishful thinking, no more hoping that these regimes will magically become democracies.
Exactly. We need to be realistic about their intentions and what they're capable of.
Okay.
We need to understand that this is a long game, a strategic competition between two completely different visions of what the world should be.
Okay, so step one is to wake up, recognize the threat, and acknowledge how big of a challenge this is. What else? What concrete steps can we take to actually push back against Autocracy Inc?
We need to fortify our own democracies, make them stronger, more resilient to threats from both inside and outside. That means investing in education, civic engagement, teaching people how to think critically, and giving citizens the tools they need to spot and resist manipulation.
So it's about empowering individuals, strengthening the institutions that protect our freedoms, and reaffirming our commitment to those democratic values. But what about technology? Autocracy Inc. seems to be using it to their advantage. Can democracies turn the tables and use technology to defend themselves?
Definitely. Technology is a double-edged sword. It can be used for repression, but it can also be a powerful force for good. It can promote democracy, transparency, and accountability. We need to invest in research and development, encourage innovation, and create technologies that can combat disinformation, protect our privacy, safeguard our elections, and give more power to citizens.
So it's about making sure technology serves humanity, that it supports democratic values, and that it's used to promote freedom, not control. What about the economic front? It seems like they're exploiting the global financial system to their advantage. Can we do anything to stop that?
We need to close the loopholes that let them hide and move their money. Stronger financial regulations, enforcing sanctions, cracking down on corruption, and holding accountable anyone who helps them.
So hit them where it hurts, their wallets. Disrupt their financial networks, make it risky and expensive for them to operate, and ultimately cut off their access to the resources they need to stay in power.
Exactly. It's also about promoting ethical business practices, holding corporations accountable, and making sure our economic system isn't supporting their activities without even realizing it. It's about creating a fairer and more equitable global economic order that doesn't reward corruption and exploitation.
Okay, so we've talked about strengthening our democracies, using technology for good, and hitting them in the wallet. But what about the international arena? It seems like Autocracy Inc. is gaining more and more influence in international institutions, building alliances with other autocratic regimes, and actively trying to undermine the existing rules-based international order.
You're right. They're actively working to reshape the world to benefit their own interests, and we can't just sit back and let that happen. We need to push back. That means strengthening alliances with other democracies, promoting human rights, upholding international law, and holding these regimes accountable for their actions.
It's about building a united front against authoritarianism.
And it's about supporting those who are fighting for democracy and human rights all over the world. The activists, the journalists, the civil society organizations, they're on the front lines of this struggle, risking their lives every day to defend freedom and democratic values. They need our support. We need to give them financial resources, political solidarity, and an unwavering commitment to their cause.
It's a reminder that we're not alone in this fight. There are brave people all over the world standing up to these regimes, fighting for a better future. And we have a moral obligation to support them, to stand with them, and to amplify their voices.
Absolutely. The fight against Autocracy Inc. is a global one, and it needs a global response. This is a fight for the future of our world, for the very heart of democracy. And it's a fight we can win, but only if we're willing to fight.
So we've spent this whole deep dive talking about this massive threat from Autocracy Inc., their tactics, their strategies, how far their reach goes. It's pretty clear this is a battle for the future of democracy itself, and we can't just sit back and watch. But where do we even start pushing back against something this powerful? What are the best ways to counter what they're doing and protect the values we care about?
It's a tough one, for sure. But there are things we can do. One of the most important is going after their money. Remember, kleptocracy is how Autocracy Inc. survives. We need to make it way harder, maybe even impossible, for them to hide and move their stolen wealth.
So we're talking about following the money, right?
That-
Exposing those networks of shell companies, offshore accounts, all those secret transactions they use to hide billions of dollars.
Exactly. Shine a light on these shadowy financial systems, tighten the rules, make sanctions actually work, and hold accountable everyone who helps them. I'm talking about the bankers, the lawyers, the accountants, real estate agents, anyone who helps this dirty money flow, often looking the other way when it comes to where it came from.
It sounds like we're taking on a global mafia. But instead of street thugs, we're dealing with powerful people and institutions operating at the highest levels of finance and global commerce.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. We have to disrupt those financial networks, make it so risky and expensive that it just falls apart. We need to hit them where it hurts, their wallets. But it's not all about the money, right? We also need to fight back against their propaganda and disinformation campaigns. How do we even do that in the age of social media where misinformation spreads so fast?
It feels like they're always a step ahead, using those platforms that were meant to connect us and turning them into weapons to manipulate us.
They're good at it, that's for sure. But that doesn't mean we're helpless. One of the best tools we have is education. We need to teach people how to be media literate, give them the critical thinking skills to spot and resist manipulation.
So it's about giving people the tools to be smarter about the information they see, to be skeptical of headlines, to double-check sources, and to really think critically about what they're reading and watching.
Right. We can't just passively absorb information anymore. We have to be active, questioning everything, checking facts, and having a healthy dose of skepticism. And it's not just about individual responsibility. Those social media platforms need to be held accountable too. It's their responsibility to stop the spread of disinformation and keep their platforms from being used to attack democracy.
So we need to pressure those tech giants to actually do something about content moderation, be more transparent about how their algorithms work, and take a more proactive approach to fighting disinformation.
Absolutely. They have the resources and the reach to make a real difference. But we can't just play defense. We need to go on the offensive and counter their narratives. We need to expose their lies, debunk their propaganda, and offer a better vision, one that's based on facts, truth, and democratic values.
So it's like fighting fire with fire. But our weapons are truth and transparency, not their tactics. But what about their use of technology for repression? The whole idea of them using facial recognition, AI surveillance, and predictive policing to control people is terrifying. It sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. Can we even keep up with that level of technology?
It's a big challenge, but we can't just give up and accept a future where technology is only used for control and oppression. Democracies need to invest in research and development, not just to stay even, but to create technologies that protect privacy, safeguard freedom, and empower citizens.
So we need to build a tech ecosystem that actually aligns with democratic values, one that prioritizes individual rights, transparency, and accountability. But tech is only one piece of the puzzle. We've talked about how important it is to support those who are on the front lines, the democracy activists, journalists, and human rights defenders who are risking their lives to challenge these regimes. What can we do to really help them?
These are the unsung heroes of this fight, and they need our unwavering support. We have to give them financial resources, technical help, and legal support. We have to make sure their voices are heard, shine a light on their struggles, and hold their oppressors accountable.
It's about showing them that they're not alone, that the world is watching, and that we're standing with them as they fight for freedom. It's about using our own platforms, our resources, and our influence to help those who are risking everything for the values we hold dear.
We need to remember that this is not just a political battle, it's a moral one. It's about protecting the most basic principles of human dignity, freedom, and the right to determine our own destinies. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous.
It's a powerful reminder that the fight for democracy is happening all over the world, and we all have a part to play. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Autocracy Inc., what's the most important message you want our listeners to take away?
Well, Autocracy Inc. is a tough opponent, no question. They have the money, they're organized, and they're ruthless in their pursuit of power, but they can be beaten. Democracies have faced down authoritarian threats before, and we can do it again.
History is on our side. The human desire for freedom, for dignity, for the right to choose our own path, those are powerful forces that have brought down dictators and changed the world time and time again.
But that doesn't mean we can afford to be complacent. The future isn't set in stone. We have a choice to make. We can give in to cynicism and apathy, or we can fight for the kind of world we want, a world where democracy, freedom, and justice win.
It's a call to action, a reminder that we all have a responsibility to stand up for what we believe in.
The choice is ours.
Powerful words to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been an eye-opener, that's for sure. If you're feeling as inspired as we are to make a difference.
Knowledge is power, and in this fight, we need all the power we can get.
Absolutely. So until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay hopeful.